All right, so are you ready to like really dive deep with us today? Because we are going to unpack some fascinating insights into relationships.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to look at what makes them tick,
Yeah.
what makes them last, and like how our own mindsets play a role in all of this.
And it's really interesting because the source material that we are exploring is geared towards men,
Okay.
but the psychology it delves into,
Sure.
it's relevant to like anyone
Totally.
navigating love and connection.
Exactly. It's like a peek behind the curtain of how we choose partners and then why some relationships fizzle while others flourish
Right.
and what it really means to find that, quote unquote, perfect match.
Yeah, and the source doesn't shy away from those big questions.
Yeah.
It tackles things head on,
Yeah.
like the difference between just infatuation and lasting love,
Right.
or how to spot those red flags.
Yeah.
That might mean a relationship is doomed from the start.
So let's jump right in. You mentioned the source material focuses on men. Does it like frame monogamy and polyamory differently based on gender?
Well, it highlights some interesting trends. For example, how societal expectations can push men towards a player mentality.
Yeah.
Seeking validation through just multiple conquests,
Right.
but without real emotional investment.
Got it.
But then it contrasts that with ethical polyamory,
Okay.
where honesty and consent are like paramount.
Okay.
It's not about juggling secrets or anything. It's
Sure.
about open communication and genuine connection, but with multiple partners.
That's a really important distinction. It makes you wonder, even within monogamy,
Yeah.
how many people are truly happy
Yeah.
versus just going through the motions because that's what's expected.
And that's where the source introduces this concept of serial monogamy, jumping from one relationship to the next without ever really finding what they're looking for. And they use this analogy of a hurdle race.
Okay.
Some people are so fixated on that relationship finish line that they miss all the crucial steps it takes to actually get there.
Like they're so busy chasing the idea of being in a relationship that they neglect like actually building one.
Exactly. And the source argues that this stems from a scarcity mentality.
Okay.
This belief that your options are limited.
Oh.
You have to grab whatever you can get before it's gone,
Right.
which can lead to neediness, jealousy, and ultimately self-sabotage.
It's like that feeling desperation makes you act in ways that push people away.
Precisely. And the source makes a really compelling case for the antidote to all this.
What's that?
Cultivating an abundance mentality.
Okay.
The belief that you have options, that you are worthy of love,
Right.
and that you can choose a partner from a place of confidence rather than fear.
That makes a lot of sense.
Uh.
But how do you actually go from feeling scarce to feeling abundant?
Right.
It can't just be a switch you flip in your mind, right?
It's an ongoing process, but the source provides some practical steps.
Okay.
One of the most important is self-awareness. Understanding your own patterns and beliefs around relationships.
Wow.
Do you tend to jump into things too quickly?
Yeah.
Do you get overly attached easily?
Right.
Identifying those tendencies is the first step towards changing them.
So it's about recognizing your own baggage and how it might be affecting your choices.
Exactly. And another key element is focusing on your own self-development.
Okay.
When you invest in yourself, you naturally become more confident,
Yeah.
more attractive,
Right.
which in turn draws the right kind of people into your life.
So it's not just about finding the right person, it's about becoming the right person.
The source is really big on this idea that you attract what you are,
Right.
not what you want.
Okay, so let's say you've done the work.
Yeah.
You're feeling confident.
Okay.
You've ditched the scarcity mentality.
Right.
How do you actually know if a relationship has the potential to go the distance?
That's where the source introduces this really fascinating concept
Okay.
called the consummate love triangle.
Ooh, this sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
So it's like a blueprint
Okay.
for understanding what makes love last.
Okay.
The source argues that for a relationship to have that forever potential,
Yeah.
it needs all three sides of this triangle.
Okay.
Passion, logic,
Okay.
and emotional connection.
So it's not enough to just have like that sizzling chemistry.
Right.
You need more than butterflies and fireworks
You need more.
to make it work.
Yeah, think of it this way.
All right.
That initial spark of attraction.
Yeah.
That's your passion side.
Okay.
It's what draws you to someone physically and makes you crave their company.
Right.
But for a relationship to go beyond that infatuation phase, you also need logic.
Logic. Okay.
Does this person fit into your life?
Yeah.
Do your values and goals align?
Right.
Do you see a future together on a practical level?
So like if you're a free spirit who loves to travel and they're a homebody who values stability,
Right.
That could be a sign that, like, the logic side of the triangle is missing.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's the third side, emotional connection.
Oh, emotional connection.
Just the feeling of truly getting each other, having those deep conversations, sharing vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
feeling safe and supported.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what happens if one of those sides of the triangle is missing?
Yeah.
Does the source give any examples of how that plays out in real life?
They do, and it's fascinating. For example, they talk about hopeless romantic love.
Okay, a hopeless romantic love.
Which is what happens when you have passion and emotional connection, but logic is missing. You might feel intensely in love, like you found your soulmate.
Right.
But deep down,
Yeah.
there are fundamental incompatibilities that will eventually surface.
It's like you're ignoring those red flags because the emotional and physical connection is so strong.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's superficial love.
Superficial love.
Which is when you have passion and logic,
Okay.
but you lack that deep emotional bond.
Right.
This might be a classic friends with benefits situation.
Right.
Where you enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
Things work on a practical level.
Yeah.
But there's no real intimacy or vulnerability.
It's interesting how the source breaks it down. Like that it makes you realize that just because a relationship feels good in the moment, it doesn't necessarily mean it has the ingredients for long-term success.
Right.
Like it might not.
And this ties back to that idea of the abundance mentality.
Okay.
When you know you have options and you're not settling for less than you deserve, you're more likely to hold out for a relationship that has all three sides of that love triangle.
So it's about not settling for a two-legged stool when you could have a sturdy three-legged one.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And the source emphasizes this point really strongly.
Okay.
They actually say, and I'm quoting here, "As far as we know, you will only live once. You cannot afford to settle for anything less than absolutely perfection."
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and I think it's meant to be a bit provocative, to make people really think about their choices and whether they're truly prioritizing their own happiness.
It definitely makes you question whether you're settling for good enough when you could be experiencing something truly extraordinary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about romantic relationships.
Okay.
This idea of not settling applies to all areas of life.
Right, like your career.
Your career, your
Street.
friendships, your hobbies.
Yeah. Okay.
Why settle for mediocrity when you could be thriving?
Okay, but let's be real. Perfection doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? Even in the most amazing relationships, there are going to be challenges and compromises.
Of course. I think what the source is getting at is that you shouldn't settle for a relationship that feels fundamentally misaligned
Right.
or where you're constantly compromising your core values.
Yeah.
It's about finding someone who complements you,
Right.
who brings out your best self,
Yeah.
and who you can grow and evolve with over time.
So how does all of this tie into the idea of polyamory? Does the source suggest that polyamorous relationships are more likely to achieve this consummate love?
They don't necessarily say that,
Okay.
but they do present polyamory as a valid option
Okay.
for those who are seeking a different kind of relationship model.
Right.
They emphasize that ethical polyamory is built on a foundation of honesty, consent, and clear communication.
Which makes sense if you're going to have multiple relationships. Everyone involved needs to be on the same page and comfortable with the arrangement.
Right. And the source goes into detail
Okay.
about the specific rules for successful polyamory.
Okay.
They argue that it's not just about having multiple partners.
Right.
It's about having healthy, fulfilling relationships with each of them.
Okay, so let's break down those rules. What does the source consider to be the essential ingredients for ethical polyamory?
Well, the first rule is a big one.
Okay.
No jealousy.
No jealousy. Wow.
They're really emphasizing a shift in mindset here.
Okay.
A move away from possessiveness towards genuine happiness
Okay.
for your partner's other relationships.
That sounds like a tall order. How do you actually get to a place where you're not feeling jealous when your partner is intimate with someone else?
The source suggests that it's about recognizing that your partner's capacity to love other people
Okay.
doesn't diminish their love for you.
Oh, okay.
It's about celebrating their happiness and seeing their other relationships as enriching their life, not taking away from yours.
It's like that saying, love is not a pie. When you give a slice to someone, you don't have less.
Exactly. And it ties into the next rule, which is all about selfless satisfaction.
Selfless satisfaction.
It's the idea that your partner's happiness is your happiness.
Right.
And vice versa.
Okay.
You're both invested in each other's well-being.
Right.
Even if that well-being involves other relationships.
So it's kind of like taking the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated.
Yeah.
And applying it to your romantic relationships.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It's about approaching your relationships with a spirit of generosity.
Yeah.
Wanting the best for your partner, even if that means stepping outside of traditional monogamous norms.
And honesty is a huge part of this, right?
Absolutely. The source is adamant that you need to be upfront about being polyamorous from the very beginning.
Right.
No sneaking around.
Right.
No waiting until things get serious to drop the polyamory bomb.
So before you even kiss someone,
Yeah.
before things get intimate, they need to know that you're not looking for monogamy.
Exactly. And the source argues that if you have that strong abundance mentality we talked about earlier, you won't be afraid to be honest about who you are and what you're looking for.
Because you know that the right people will be drawn to your authenticity, even if that's not what everyone is looking for.
Exactly. And if someone isn't open to polyamory, it's better to know that sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
so that no one's time or feelings are wasted.
Speaking of knowing when to walk away, the source also has a rule about not leading people on.
Right. It's about recognizing when a relationship isn't working
Okay.
and having the courage to end it, rather than stringing someone along out of guilt or a fear of being alone.
Even if it's hard.
Yeah.
Even if you care about that person.
It's about being honest with yourself and with them, recognizing that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go, even if it hurts in the short term.
And the source emphasizes that polyamory is often, though, not always temporary.
Right. It's not necessarily about finding the one or building a lifelong partnership with multiple people.
It's more about recognizing that different relationships can serve different purposes at different points in our lives.
Exactly. And that it's okay for those relationships to evolve or come to an end as we grow and change.
So it's not just about ending relationships that aren't working. It's also about supporting your partner's growth, even if it means they eventually move on.
You hit the nail on the head. The source calls this helping your partners grow.
Okay. Helping your partners grow.
It's about encouraging their self-development.
Right.
Even if that development leads them in a different direction.
So it's about recognizing that their journey isn't necessarily tied to yours.
Exactly. And that sometimes the best way to love someone is to support their growth, even if it means letting them go.
There's a real sense of maturity and selflessness in that perspective.
It goes against the grain of our often possessive, jealous, and insecure approach to love.
Right.
But it's ultimately what allows for true freedom and growth.
Within relationships.
Within relationships, yeah.
And finally, the source throws in a rule about, well, let's just say, keeping things spicy.
Yes. Sexual validation.
Sexual validation.
The source is pretty straightforward about this one. It's about making your partners feel desired and attractive, whether that's through physical intimacy or simply through words and gestures of affirmation.
So it's not just about fulfilling your own needs. It's about making your partners feel confident, valued, and seen.
Precisely. And it's a reminder that polyamory, like any healthy relationship, requires effort, communication, and a genuine desire to make your partners feel loved and appreciated.
This is a lot to take in. We've covered so much ground, from the definition of polyamory to the psychological factors that influence our relationship choices to these really specific guidelines for ethical non-monogamy.
It's a lot to process, but I think it's valuable information.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you're interested in polyamory or monogamy.
I agree. It's all about being honest with ourselves, understanding our own motivations, and approaching relationships with intentionality and respect.
And it makes you wonder, how do these principles apply even within monogamous relationships? How can we be more honest with ourselves and our partners about our needs and expectations, regardless of the relationship model?
That's a great question, and one that I think we should explore further in the next part of our deep dive. It's funny, we've spent this whole deep dive, talking about monogamy versus polyamory.
Right.
But what's really hitting me is how many of these principles just apply across the board, no matter what kind of relationship you're in.
Absolutely. The source might be geared towards a specific audience.
Right.
But that underlying message about honesty, self-awareness, and intentional communication.
Totally.
That's universal.
Yeah, think about all those monogamous relationships that just crumble because of unspoken expectations or a lack of communication. Maybe one person is dreaming of a house full of kids while the other is picturing a life of adventurous travel.
Right.
Or they have different ideas about finances or how much time they want to spend together.
Totally. And the source's emphasis on just laying it all out on the table.
Yeah.
Even the stuff that's uncomfortable to talk about.
Right.
That's relevant, whether you're dating one person or five.
It's like that saying, assumptions are the termites of relationships.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We assume our partner knows what we want or how we feel.
Right.
But the reality is, clear communication is the only way to truly understand each other's needs and expectations.
And that communication isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
It is.
Even in a long-term monogamous relationship.
Yeah.
It's important to check in regularly to make sure you're both still on the same page and that your needs are being met.
That makes me think about how the Source talked about helping your partners grow, even if it means they eventually move on.
Right.
That seems kind of counterintuitive in a monogamous context.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a lesson there, too.
What's fascinating here is that even in a committed relationship, people change and evolve over time.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best way to love someone is to support their growth, even if that means letting go of certain expectations or even the relationship itself.
So it's about recognizing that your partner isn't your property.
Right.
And that their happiness might not always align perfectly with your own.
Exactly. And that can be a really tough pill to swallow.
It is.
But ultimately, I think it comes down to a question of love versus control.
Oh, wow.
Do you love your partner enough to want what's best for them, even if it's not what's best for you?
That's deep. And it makes you wonder how many of us are truly practicing that kind of selfless love in our relationships.
It's definitely something to reflect on.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to the Source's emphasis on the abundance mentality.
Okay.
When you're coming from a place of scarcity, it's easy to cling to relationships out of fear of being alone or missing out.
You're afraid to be alone.
But when you believe that you are worthy of love and that you have options, you're more likely to make choices that are aligned with your true desires and values.
Exactly. And that applies to every aspect of your life, not just your romantic relationships.
Totally.
So for you listening out there, whether you're happily coupled up, flying solo, or exploring all the different flavors of love,
right,
the takeaway here is this.
Yeah.
Don't settle for less than you deserve.
Yeah.
Be honest with yourself and your partners. Communicate your needs clearly. And never be afraid to grow and evolve, even if it means venturing outside of your comfort zone.
And remember, there's no one right way to do relationships.
Right.
What matters most is finding a path that feels authentic to you and that brings you joy and fulfillment.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for diving deep with us today.